You are listening to Wicked Psychotherapists, a podcast where two psychotherapists show you that taking care of and learning about mental health doesn't have to be wicked hard.
Hi, everyone. This is Tanya.
Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Wicked Psychotherapists.
Yes, we are. I'm sorry. I'm experiencing a little bit of a giggle attack because we were just talking about today is when we're recording is Eclipse Day, and Erin just said total eclipse of the heart, and then that song just launched into my head. So
Tanya's very excited. She's in
I
an
am.
area that she can see more or not see more of the eclipse because it'd be a little darker than where I am. So
Yeah.
we're recording on April 8th. So
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm excited for it. But today we are not talking about that. We are talking about online mental health platforms that have cropped up all over the internet and just talking about some of the maybe the pros and maybe some of the not pros or cons, as some would like to say, and kind of if they want to be fancy about it. But I think there's some good sides and there's some downsides. And we're not going to be naming any specific platforms, but we are just going to be talking about different aspects of different platforms that we've read about and we've heard about and just our perspective on it. So let's get into it. What, in terms of all these platforms, it's really been cropping up kind of all over the place. You hear them on ads. If you listen to podcasts, there's a lot of ads for them. There's a lot of ads on social media, and it's very appealing because we know that there's a rise in need for mental health services, but there's also a lack of mental health services being available to everyone.
right.
So I think this probably cropped up because we were noticing, as a trend, there's people saying, oh, there's a need here. And so people will fill that market. Some of these platforms have promised kind of, quick appointments that you can pay a flat fee or a subscription rate, different kind of things that may or may not be appealing to people. And, being able to get an appointment the next day as opposed to waiting 3 months on a wait list for private practice therapist is probably appealing, and I would say that does meet a need and maybe might go along with the philosophy of anything is better than nothing.
Right.
However, there can be some danger to some of these platforms or maybe some things that are not maybe as well considered as some other, kind of private practice or community mental health practices and groups. And that may be the investment and the understanding, the input from clinicians themselves in some of these companies. Because what we've been reading about is there is not a consideration taking into account clinical needs. And instead, it's kind of more about the efficacy of getting an appointment. And that only kind of meets one need. I think, the need for these platforms kind of rose up from the need to have efficient and, kind of next day therapy because there was such a rise in need for therapy, especially following COVID. But I think it's been kind of on the uptick for a long time.
Right.
And so I think some of these platforms kind of arose from that. And we're seeing that, there's a quick way to get an appointment, which is, a positive. You can usually sometimes some platforms will say next day or in that week, which is, instead of being on a wait list for private practice or kind of other counseling center for a couple months or whatever it is. So that's definitely a positive. But there's some other kind of caveats to some of these platforms, right, that we've noticed. Are there some things that you've noticed that are, positives, negatives that you want to discuss, Erin?
Yeah, so I have also noticed an uptick with these type of I don't know if it's all online therapy or you dubbed it, we were talking earlier when we were first thinking of this episode that we'd almost like fast food therapy. You schedule it and then you can see a therapist that day or the next day. And I have seen it increase. And I think it has been more so since maybe more known since around COVID and things. But I don't know if it's, if it's more needed or if people are just having more of the conversations about mental health. Also, some insurance companies have been more open with covering mental health services. But a lot of these services, some of them that I'm thinking of, I don't think they're always insurance based. I think a lot of them are subscription based or self-pay based. And it might be, I do see a lot of the pros and cons of it, where there is a benefit because people can do it from home, they could schedule right away. But there's also, it feels like there's less connection with the client and therapist in a lot of these, because you might not be seeing them if it's text based or email based. And it might feel a little, I don't know, inauthentic is the
Disjointed.
word. Yeah, I'm just thinking something, it's just a little different.
Yeah, it definitely can. If you like, it's and one of the main tenets of therapy and therapist and client is to establish a rapport, right? So right off the bat, that's a little tough. There's also the fact that, the setup of the particular online platform, and we're not talking about online therapy with a therapist in like private practice or at a counseling center. We're talking about these particular platforms that, I think you're well aware of, if they're kind of listed, you've probably heard ads for them and things like that. Again, we're not going to name them, but you know which ones they are. And I think the setup of it is really important for people to research and to see, because there's a lot of things that are to be considered. Like, yes, it is efficient, it is fast. However, is there input from clinicians, from people that do understand what is needed? Is it set up ethically?
I was thinking with the accessibility is sometimes people who wouldn't normally be able to go to therapy, whether they're in a rural setting or maybe social economical or just don't have access, or even with work, sometimes it's difficult to leave work in order to go to therapy. With these different platforms, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier. I know we were calling it almost like the fast food of therapy. But I
Yeah.
think that kind of what it is, because it is accessible to all. So people are able to almost get it whether they, would have in the past. So you don't have to traditional therapy. I know when I would go to therapy myself, like when I had a therapist that was in person, if you're going from work or after work, it's sometimes like an hour driving there or a half hour driving there. You have your appointment for 60 minutes. Then whatever time it is to commute back to work or back home. So that's a lot of time, where if you're doing these online platforms or the ones on the app or however they work, you're not really taking as much time out of your day. Maybe you're taking just the 60 minutes or the 52 minutes, but you're not worrying about travel. And then a lot of these platforms, they do have the therapist reach out through text or email or whatever else throughout the week in between sessions, which a lot of people really like.
Yeah, that is true. And I want to make a distinction that we're not talking about, therapy through like a private practice therapist that is online. We're talking about specifically about these kind of platforms, these apps that have popped up, like that's kind of specifically what this is about, because there is online therapy that has been made available. And I think we did talk about that in another, like just online therapy, I believe, in another episode, but we're talking specifically about just the apps themselves. But yeah, certainly, making it easier just for accessibility, and then also the support in between is, that has been shown to be pretty helpful. Yeah, that's definitely something that I think is definitely a plus on that. I do have to say, I think that there has been some difficulties in terms of some of these online platforms. And I'm not saying, which ones, but there has been a question of some data being sold. And so that's also something to consider, that some of these platforms are, if there's, kind of a marketing component to it, then usually there is something in there that involves, kind of some sort of privacy statement involving your data. And so whether they sell it or they don't, and they may put it as, like, oh, it's just your name and your email address and things like that. But if you think about it, in therapy, that's supposed to be protected information, PHI,
Right.
protected health information, no matter what. So it is a little bit, it's conflicting and it's tough, because then that kind of gets into a whole different realm on privacy
Mm-hmm.
and, understanding those rights. So that is also something to consider because that definitely was, talked about with some of those apps. And I think what we're just trying to say is to just be aware of these things, understand these things because this can go into it. We're now entering a territory where some of these apps that we use on our phones, a lot of them that are quote unquote free are, they're making their money from being able to sell your data. I'm not saying
Yeah.
all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah. And what they're doing on the
and-
background or whatever else is happening.
Yeah. And so, if some of these mental health platforms, if that's kind of a similar model, it's something to consider because that is not going to necessarily stop. I think some people think, oh, it's therapy. They'll take into account all these things that we have taken into account for therapy, but it's not necessarily. So you really have to check in, who's developing this? Is it just tech people? Are, do clinical people have any say in this? Is there any kind of research involved in this? Are there any studies, types of things? Because that is really important to know. I think people hear the word therapy or mental health and platform and they just think it's kind of official and it's been approved through somewhere. That's something to really look at because you do want to check in how your privacy is your private information is being used, if at all, and also how this is developed. If there is, because if you have, say, a platform that involves a theoretical perspective of, you need this much time or you need these types of resources and tools to have this consideration. If that's not understood clinically and the tech team or the tech people that are building that don't take that into consideration in setting up the platform, that's not going to be a good user experience, right? And so, it may take quite a few iterations or that platform may not take that into account. I've heard from some people that the clients get kind of upset and may think that's on the therapist, but the therapist is also having to work with the platform as well.
Right.
And, that's something that I would say for clinicians to, check out if that is something that they themselves would like to work within. Sometimes it can be really hard to tell for both clinicians and people that are trying to access the platforms. So, I think there was a good quote about, I think it was from the American Psychological Association that said, it was from an article 2024, 1/1/24. It said, how are you building mental health tools or mental health care without mental health conditions? You don't see companies building a pacemaker without cardiologists, said Jessica L. Jackson, PhD, licensed psychologist and chair of APA's Mental Health Technology Advisory Committee. So that's something to take into consideration. I really think a lot of times some of the advertising that may pop up, people may see, oh, do you need help? This is how much our platform has proven or helped people. There's testimonials. And so people think that's official, but there's other things to consider in that.
Just that quote, it's like a lot of other platforms or other things would have experts consult with them about this. And a lot of these tech mental health businesses or programs don't always consult with the mental health community while they're developing it.
Yeah, it's definitely, not something that, and you may not know how to go about, getting help. You may just say, I just need help. And this is right there, and I want to try it out. But that's just something for consideration. We can't say if that works for you or if it doesn't. But again, we've gone through some of the things that as clinicians, what we have to abide by ethically and the things that we instill in our private practice. So those are things that do have a structure, do have a guideline, do have that kind of, I think, foothold in what is considered ethics in therapy. I don't know that some of these platforms or apps, I don't know, it's kind of, it may or it may not be. That's something you have to do research into. So, and there's, with the marketing aspect, when, all of a sudden mental health becomes a marketable type of deal, it's very much, kind of that, kind of company that is driving the mission statement, that's driving the way things are done, how information is protected or not protected, that you really want to, look into and say, that basically anybody who has any desire to start up an app that, say, is mental health related, I mean, you could, if you have enough funds and the means to do so, you can do that. right? And you can advertise and market it whichever way you want. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's ethical, something that's proven. You really want to check into those conditions.
So just because you see it advertised on social media or something like that doesn't always mean that it's the best for you. It might be, but try to do your research just to make sure it aligns with what you need and what you want too.
Yeah. And I think that goes for both people seeking out therapy and providers. Certainly we've heard stories, we know of things, we've read about things, we've heard from people where, a particular platform to work for, we may say, oh, that sounds good, that's convenient, that works for us. And then we join it and it may not be the case. There may be some things that ethically are kind of gray areas that, you're all of a sudden thinking, oh, wait. And then the pay may be a different kind of scale than you were thinking. And again, that may not, keep too many therapists there. And it's so strange to me because I have heard from clients who, come to me and say they have tried some of these platforms. They will immediately say the therapists aren't good there. And I really want to point out that you really have to look at the platform in order to say that, because you can't have, you can have some really good therapists, but you're probably not going to retain them with a model like that, right? Where it's not working for them and it's actually quite, I don't know, it's somewhat exploiting them. So I don't really think that that's something that would keep too many therapists, at least not happy. So, I do think that those are definite considerations. And are there other things that you think maybe people should consider or look at, or things that are maybe not really talked about with some of these platforms?
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it with the security of the breaches that seem to happen sometimes. I guess I would question too of how some of these therapists are getting vetted, like I assume that most of them are licensed in these different platforms because, like if you look at them, they say they are. So I assume that they probably are going through that, where you want to make sure you're using a platform or an app where they do make sure that the therapists are licensed in the state that you reside in or where you're at, because then you could have some ethical issues as well, because then they're not able to practice or to help you if they're just serving everywhere and they're not licensed in the state that you're located in.
Yeah, that's a huge liability for the providers to consider. I will say this, I did a while back, this just popped in my head. I did apply to a platform that promised to, I could see clients. It was kind of something that I was just using to supplement, or I thought I would use it to supplement. I did not start with this company with just different types of therapy. I thought the model of therapy was pretty good. I thought I was kind of iffy on the clinical, informative kind of nature of the setup of the platform. But the thing that really got to me was when I asked the question and I said, well, we get, it looks like we kind of have national clients, so how does that, I'm only licensed in Massachusetts. And in case anyone doesn't know, we don't have a national licensure, not yet. We're trying to, I think the compact is working on that, but we cannot, unless you have to be individually licensed in different states, you have to apply for them. During COVID, there was some kind of, with some states, there was a little bit more leeway.
Yeah, there was some, like if your client went to a different state and maybe stayed there or couldn't get back, or they were given a few months, because I had that happen where a few clients moved during COVID and you had to ask the state almost like permission, where they were like, okay, yeah, you can do this for 6 months or 3 months or whatever long it is. But then after that, you'd have to try to get licensed, which I didn't. I just ended up, had to discharge the clients after that time period.
Yeah, because it's a long process and it can be an expensive process for each state. So it's not an easy just kind of say like, oh, I just want to practice here, I fill out an application. It's a long process for each one, depending. Some of them are nearly impossible if you don't originally have the licensure there. What I asked about for that job was, I said, how does that work? And they said, well, that's something that you have to consider for your own individual license. And so I immediately was like, I'm good. I actually do not want this position. I don't want to go any further, because I was like, that's not they are then saying, I'm risking my license, and they don't care. You have to work within this model, but it's on you, kind of thing. And
Oh,
that's a big thing that I think needs to be looked out for, because again, even as providers, we may think, oh, well, these companies, they're working, they understand how our licensure works. That is not necessarily the case. And I've heard that story more than once, not just about about a few different platforms.
yeah. I have
Yeah.
too, where you say, okay, well, I'm licensed in this state, for me, I'm licensed in Florida. And then say, okay, we're only going to give you Florida clients. Then all of a sudden you have to be really aware, because they might send you someone from New York or something. And you're like, wait a minute, I can't accept this client because they're not within my license. And it's not, the company doesn't always filter it out for you.
No, they don't. And they may actually even require you they may say, to keep this job, you have to accept all the clients we send to you,
Hmm.
but then you're risking your own licensure. So these things are not all coordinated and connected, and it's not looking out for, the therapist's licensure. You have to always look out for your
Right.
own licensure. I just want that as a message out there, because on some boards that I belong to, in terms of like, social media boards or whatever, when I see people talking about different things, some people have definitely posted about this in general and have said, I am choosing not to take this because this is like, they're not looking out for us,
Right.
like, and how can you have, that's completely, almost like, when I asked this person, they didn't really seem to think it was a big deal. And I'm thinking, that's my license. Do you know
Yeah.
how hard I work for that? Do you know I haven't even paid off all my student loans for that? And you think I just should do that for your company? Like, it's so that disconnect there is a huge thing. And you also want to be, as a client, it's nothing on you, but say if I were to see you in Wisconsin or something and I'm in Massachusetts, if you have an emergency, I may not have, I don't have access to how they handle crises there. I know how to do it in
Hmm.
Massachusetts. That's a part of something that I've learned, I'm familiar with, and knowing all the laws, what you have to report, what you don't report, etc. Those are things that that could be that's not great guidance there, and not good looking out for if you have an emergency, or if need certain things, resources, things you need to be informed on. That's also not good for the client. So just wanted to point that out as well. But yeah, I think it's worth taking a look into, and for some people it may just be that they need something tomorrow. They get someone to talk to, they have a few sessions, they're good, and that works for them. Whatever, that's fine for them. I would say some people with some more complicated issues, how do you think that fares with some of these online platforms? Like, in terms of, like, maybe they have complex PTSD, or maybe they have, some sort of personality
Yeah.
disorder, things
I
like that.
I personally don't think that there would do the best in that type of platform. Even myself, because I do telehealth, and I'm not an app, I'm not one of those platforms, but I do try to refer out for those type of clients, not only because it's out of my scope, but because a lot of them might do better with in person, maybe more intensive, where there is the possibility of other supports available if they need them,
Right.
if they're in crisis. Where a lot of those apps, you don't really know where the person is. And like you just said, like what is set up if there is an emergency, or you don't, some of them, I'm hoping that all the clients, when when you use those apps, are telling the truth where they're located. But what if they're saying they're located in your state, but they're actually on vacation somewhere else, and then they're in
Right.
crisis?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And that's really kind of, having a system, having that kind of rapport, which, could be something that could happen with anyone. But when you have more complex diagnoses or personality disorders, it may be closer at hand more times than not, than someone who's just kind of coming in for something acute, or, working through a temporary kind of issue, just kind of, that's a very vast generalization, but something to consider. And I agree with you. And, I do private practice telehealth as well. And it definitely can be, I think that, we have to make considerations of, I'm only one single person. Like, I have my own databases, my own referrals, things like that, but I am just one person.
Right.
If someone is going to require kind of, more care than that, I do have to refer them to another place or another
Hmm.
person who has a setup for that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. And some of these platforms may not. Some of them may just kind of filter through and not filter through and just send it to the clinician. And then this person is saying, I really need help. And then there they are, and they kind of have to manage that. And they may not be equipped for that in terms of like what they have for their resources and stuff. There's also those considerations that, sometimes I've seen that the advertisements, the ads, the marketing of some of these online platforms that say, if you need help, we can help you kind of thing. And so it kind of gears towards a message of anyone can get help here, when that you may want to check out, what the kind of help is, because it may not be for that complexity.
And also some of them, like I had mentioned earlier, like a convenience factor is like if you have insurance, you might just have to pay your copay or it's covered. But some of them require you to put your credit card down, or some of them have a membership base where they might not take insurance, where you might do a monthly fee, or, it actually might end up being more expensive than if you were to go to a traditional therapist. So that's something to look into too, because it may sound like you're saving a lot of money and it's more convenient and it's more cost effective, but it also is important to look and see if it really is.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, just good considerations, and, the point where, seeing if you're okay with your data being sold along with this, that's a big point. And you also brought up breaches as well, if there are breaches in data, which I think, that can happen pretty much anywhere. Right? Nowadays, but that's also another thing to kind of consider. But, of course I think that could go for either side, but the actual selling of data is kind of in that initial contract. It's very small print. Nobody ever really reads it, the privacy terms, and they're not saying we're going to sell your data. Instead, it's said in a different way, where basically like, other companies you're saying that this is okay for other companies to have access to this or something.
Yeah.
And it's said in a way that you might not think about, but it is definitely.
And it may be worded that you feel like it's more medical, or it's, to help you, in a therapeutic way, but it's not always.
Yeah, you definitely want to check into that, because I know going to a traditional like a, private practice, something like that, if you are ethically, you should be ethically bound to that. That's never something that we could be like, oh, can we, I actually need to make some extra money. Could you just sign right here so that I can, just give your Gmail address or, whatever. They'd probably look at you like you're crazy, and they'd never want to go there. But this is done so slyly, and it's done in so many different types of apps. But there is a quote here that it's from The Guardian in February of this year. And it basically says, any company with sufficient funds for marketing can easily enter the market without needing to demonstrate that their app can either keep users engaged or add any value at all. In particular, Torres criticizes the poor quality of many supposed pilot studies, which set the app such a low bar for efficacy that the results are virtually meaningless. So, and this is just kind of, one particular case, but this article was pointing to the fact that, anybody can kind of start up some of these apps, and it doesn't really have to prove effective. You can just kind of have a business from this, and you don't have to consider any of these tenets that we all associate with mental health therapy. Oh, they have to do this. They have to keep my information private. Well, this is now a different realm in the, technology and these types of
that's why I like when
apps.
when you're downloading an app on any of the, like wherever you get your apps, whether you have Apple or, Android or whatever, you want to, because sometimes they will say like, like we'll sell data or, whatever. So you always want to make sure things are secure and you really want to make sure things are secure if you're using the app for your mental health.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the basic tenets is, again, I just try to picture going to a doctor and, that there being something where you're signing this privacy notice that says, oh yeah, we can sell your email or this or that to this pharmaceutical company because, you don't mind, right? Kind of thing. And, shooting off your information. I think a lot of people would be outraged by that, but this can be the case with some of these, now technologically based mental health apps. So really be careful in distinguishing that, so, and again, we're not saying that there's apps out there or platforms that are not really good and
Yeah.
helpful. And these are just things for you to consider that maybe are kind of in the fine print and
Yeah.
things that maybe are not.
And there's some that are like amazing and really help people. And, but then there are a couple that you're like, are they kind of skirting the line of ethics?
Yes. And I know we have talked about that and we are not going to say that, but yes, we definitely have some opinions on that. So it's, so just something to consider for you all and providers as well. If you're listening, if you're considering working for some of these platforms as well, there's no absolutes. It's just kind of ideas.
And another really good benefit for providers is if they are trying to start a private practice or they want to do the online private practice, but they don't really have the tools to start their own business. So a lot of them go to these apps or these different types of companies because it is convenient, because you're given all these clients and you don't have to do the marketing. You don't have to have your own medical records or, like medical record platform or anything. They provide it for you. So that's very appealing to a lot of people. And it is probably helpful for the therapist just trying to figure out, is this what I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've known a lot of people who have done that and transition or just are doing that or, kind of do that just to kind of, move along in terms of, maybe there's some dry spells in the private practice or you're trying to take a pause and kind of trying to do something where you're not lifting everything, in the private practice. Totally understandable. It's just, you just want to do your research. That's all, and just kind of know what it is you're working with so that you yourself are protected. You can feel good about that and, where you're working and kind of the modality that you're working in, because that's just something that it's going to definitely become apparent and, will, affect the way you want to work within it as well. So yeah, some really good considerations, but, I think those are. Any other thoughts kind of on the pros or the cons?
Well, I was just thinking, I don't know if it's a pro or a con, but you really, and those type of platforms, a lot of times you can't really pick who you want to see. So a lot of the, in private practice, you get to pick your niche or your niche or however you say it. But I heard that in a lot of those platforms, it's like, okay, well, you're going to see this person with this issue or this, like, so for instance, in my private practice, I just see women and, different issues. But so they might throw some men or throw some teens, but usually they do have the age range. So I don't see teens. I just tend to see adults. I might see some male or see some other concerns that I don't normally treat. So that's something to think about too. Do they have a clause that you're allowed to say you don't want to see that client and have them refer it to somebody else? That would be important for me.
Yeah, that's such a good point because you can't in your private practice, you can kind of tailor that towards, okay, this is who I work best with and advertise it as such. Some of these platforms, they may allow you to make like an employee or like a database profile. And you probably can choose some like specialties or whatever, but I mean, I don't know. It depends on how specific that gets or not. You may not have as much say in that, so that may be something that, that can be definitely really helpful. It's not just a matter of like desire of wanting to work with it. It's what your skill base is in too, So it's almost if a doctor kind of was like, oh, I'm usually a cardiologist, but like they're kind of having me just see, kind of whatever. I mean, definitely, I don't think we're as, specialized, that it wouldn't be as extreme anywhere near. But, it definitely, I think, serves the client and the provider much better if they can kind of choose to go to someone who usually works with that population or those issues or difficulties. Yeah. But yeah, so we hope you enjoyed this episode on mental health platforms. Just something to keep in mind and consider. Leave us some comments. Let us know if you have suggestions for future episodes. We'd love to hear about that. Anything that you are thinking. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wicked Psychotherapists. On Facebook, we are the Wicked Psychotherapists. And subscribe. Follow us anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And don't forget to write us a review.
Yes.
A good one.
Yeah, that
sounded menacing. I was like, a good one.
You don't want the one star.
Oh, yeah. We don't really want if you're going to think of that, then maybe not write a review, but no, that's just the world of, reviews.
Algorithms,
that is kind of how,
and
that's just
and
part
tell
of
your
it.
friends. Like, we seem to be getting some weeks we're getting a couple more listeners, so definitely share it with people.
Yeah, and people that are interested in therapy, psychology, mental health, people that are in the field, people that just are interested in general. But yeah, for sure. And don't forget, stay wicked.
And keep your mind well.
Bye, guys. We'll see you next week.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.